have a few more coming. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, if you want to, come on up. Mike, you're welcome to come up if you want to.
Oh, we can squeeze in.
Yes, well, we have a special hat position as well.
Hat position.
What am I supposed to say? 8 minutes, 16 is this? Oh.
Just for the audio.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You guys ready? Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Siegel. I'm the chairman of the Harris County Republican Party. We've called you here. We want to make some announcements as it relates to legal action that the party's taken. Under Texas Elections Code, Section 276.019, it's illegal for the election official to deviate from the election code. We're doing this in order to shed light on what has been happening, how Harris County actually runs their elections. You know, what we've seen over the past year, instead of it just being a few incidences of breakdown in how the process has been run, we've seen what's turned out to be a systemic cancer in how Harris County actually runs its elections. You know, we started this, we saw it in the primary, that there were mass failures in terms of staffing, double staffing, the equipment not working, etc. Then May 7th came along, which was a small election related to some of the city councils, the small school boards. And what happened there is, in fact, we were hearing about ballot boxes that didn't get delivered, and they were telling the election judge to just bring it in the next day. So this summer and during the spring, you know, we all know that Isabel Longoria actually resigned as the prior election administrator. And what the county responded was, we can clean it up, we can fix it ourselves. They hired a firm to do a review, but what we've seen is, in fact, the county hasn't fixed it. We saw more problems, more egregious problems last Tuesday on November 8th. Again, staffing problems, polls not opening on time. They didn't have equipment. There were many polls that had maybe a third of their equipment working during the day. People would call, our judges would be calling in, requesting help. They would wait on hold for 45 minutes, or they would never, the county would never actually pick up the call from their helpline. And then the most egregious was the fact that we had polls that actually ran out of paper. And we, in the party, notified the county. We called election administrator Tatum and notified his management team as early as approximately 10 or 10:30 on Tuesday morning. And they continued to argue with my staff, with the judges, that they said, you have enough paper. So that's why we're taking the legal action that we're announcing today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our legal counsel, Andy Taylor.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. My name is Andy Taylor. I'm an election lawyer, and I represent the Harris County Republican Party. We're here to announce that just a few moments ago, we filed a 20-page lawsuit in state district court. The plaintiffs are the Harris County Republican Party and its chair, Cindy Siegel. The defendants are the election administrator, who is Clifford Tatum, and indeed Harris County itself. This lawsuit should have never been required to have been filed, but because of the actions of the defendants, in particular the election administrator, Cliff Tatum, we had to, in order to be able to restore any confidence in elections going forward in Harris County. I want to tell you a little bit about this lawsuit and explain why we did it. So, as you know, this election was so botched that it has risen to the level of an epic proportion. And there is no way to be confident in the outcome of these close races. You literally cannot ascertain the winner versus the loser. Let me give you a few examples. How can it be that when voters go to vote on election day, there's not enough paper? If you don't have paper, you can't vote. We found just in our first day of investigation, 23 polling locations on election day that didn't have any paper. And just looking at 2 of those locations, 350 registered innocent voters who came to exercise their constitutional right to vote were turned away. That is absolutely unacceptable. And the party is here to say to Clifford Tatum, shame on you. You knew better. You know what turnout was like in earlier elections. It was not difficult to be able to send a sufficient number of ballots to the polls, and yet you didn't. And why is that? Why is it that our initial investigation demonstrates that the polling sites that didn't get paper were Republican strongholds? That's a concern. That makes us wonder if this is something more than just a colossal screw-up. Was this intentional? That's why the governor of Texas just a few hours ago issued a request of the Texas Rangers, of the Attorney General of Texas, and also the Secretary of State to open and launch an investigation into what just exactly happened in Harris County. Let me give you a second example that our lawsuit talks about. When you go to the poll, you have to scan your ballot into a scanning machine. If there is a problem with one or both of those pieces of paper going into the machine, the process is very simple. You put the problem ballot and you segregate it into something called an emergency chute. That's a receptacle that holds all of these problem ballots, the purpose of which is to earmark those for the central count that's downtown or actually at NRG, where they're supposed to do their work and they count these problem ballots. That's not the way Harris County ran this. Instead, they gave a new set of ill-advised instructions to people that were not trained. These are not election lawyers. These are volunteers who are trying to do their level best, and they're civic-minded, and they gave them a set of instructions that were absolutely impossible to understand. And what it resulted in is the election officials were putting ballots in that chute that weren't supposed to go there. And you know what that means? It means that there's double counting. So we have got innocent voters who now have accidentally voted not once, but twice. And if you have double votes and a hard count, how can you ascertain the true outcome of any particular race that is close? But it gets worse than that. On election day, we find out that there is an emergency hearing. This is at 5, 6 p.m. at night, where the polls are supposed to close at 7. I'm not even invited as the lawyer for Harris County to be part of this hearing, but we find out about it. So we jump on Zoom, we get on the emergency hearing, and we find out that there is this unholy alliance, this agreement between plaintiffs who filed this emergency lawsuit and Clifford Tatum, who's supposed to be handling this election in a manner that protects everybody's right to vote. And they got together in a collusive manner, didn't give notice to the Republican Party, and they agreed and asked the judge to sign an order that would allow voting to occur for 1 additional hour. Now, at first blush, you might think, what's wrong with that? Why don't we want to give people more time to vote? Isn't that an American and a Texan thing to do? Well, if you didn't screw it up so badly, Clifford Tatum, it would have been. But you know what they did? They voted for an extra hour and made all of the problems worse, because many of the polls still didn't have paper. So now we have people voting an extra hour, while other polls that are by the way, in Republican strongholds, not getting to vote. In addition, they're supposed to have people who vote after 7 by court order to vote in what's called a provisional ballot. The reason for that is the provisional ballot is segregated from all of the other votes that are in the hard count. Well, guess what? Because Tatum didn't train his folks, they didn't segregate. And in fact, we have evidence that we've uncovered that people who came to vote for that extra hour, their vote is in the hard count. It's not segregated as a provisional ballot. In addition, you're supposed to segregate the provisional ballots that are before 7 from those that are after 7. Indeed, we had to go to the Supreme Court of Texas after this unholy alliance led to this illegal agreed order allowing for people to vote an extra hour, and the Supreme Court ordered that everything had to be segregated. And yet, did they? No, they didn't. And lastly, they actually had some polls that closed at 7, while other polls continued to accept voting for an hour. When you have 782 polling locations and you're not uniformly handling voting in those locations, that is a recipe for utter chaos and disaster. And that's what happened. And so today's lawsuit asks the court to, number one, find that all of these irregularities are blatant violations of the Texas Election Code. And number two, we're asking for the court to enter an injunction that says to Harris County, never do this again. And only once we are able to pursue that relief can we have any confidence about the future. I want to say one last thing. I believe that the evidence is going to demonstrate countless illegal acts by Administrator Tatum in this election. But I want to say to him and to Harris County, the actual governmental body, if you really believe that you didn't cheat, if you really believe that you didn't violate the law, then participate in the investigation, participate in the discovery that's going to happen. Don't try to hide, and don't file what is called a plea to the jurisdiction. The government does this all the time. They file a document that says, we're the government, we can't be held accountable in a court of law. We're asking you, Clifford Tatum, don't file that document. You may be able to run for a little while, but you can't hide forever. And eventually, we will be able to get the discovery, and then there will be a day of reckoning. It can either be quick or it can be slow. We have the resolve to go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court if necessary. I'm asking you, if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide.
You want to go? Please go.
I want to bring a couple comments as a former election official myself and a state official currently that I think are important for you to know and for the public to know. First off, during the day, election administrators have a tracking system. They know exactly how many people are at which poll because the law tells them to, and we've had a tracking system in Harris County for the better part of over a decade. So when, let's say, a Republican poll in an area that predominantly Republican got 1,200 pieces of paper, that would only be about 600 votes because there's 2 pieces per person. So they would already know under state law that they're running out of paper. And what I find abominable and unexplainable, and it can never happen again, is in the nation's 3rd largest county, we have an elections administration that won't or can't give out ballot paper to precincts so citizens can vote. And we have a young staffer here who was thrown out of Election Central because he went over and asked the question. And when he asked the question, they told him he had to leave or he was going to be guilty of trespass. So this is the type of environment that Cindy has been talking about, that Andy's been talking about. It's extremely hostile to transparency, because for 4 hours, as best as anybody can tell, nobody was going to take care of getting paper to the polls. I've talked to my own presiding judge and others that had to beg for other polls to send them extra paper. We lost complete track of any chain of custody on ballots in this entire county because people were trying to do what they could do to make sure citizens could vote, because that's what democracy is all about. But that's what's being denied here. This isn't election denier, because I've got documents from the county that say there's more ballots than there are voters. We've got complaints that say voters were suppressed because they went to polls without being able to vote because government decided not to give them a ballot. Now, you've heard about Governor Abbott's call for an investigation into improprieties in Harris County, and that started. I've got a press release out supporting him, because I have never in my life, and I've been around too long now, and I have never seen an election in a large county in America without enough ballots at polling places. Now, the Texas Secretary of State has just released a statement, and I've been authorized to read it to you. The Texas Secretary of State has received information regarding alleged improprieties in the conduct of election administration in Harris County last week. Under Section 31.006 of the Texas Election Code, our office has referred that information to the Attorney General's office and to the Harris County District Attorney's office for an investigation. Simultaneously, Harris County is already subject to the next round of post-election audits required under Section 127.351 of the Texas Election Code, so we'll be collecting even more information to ultimately provide the public with greater clarity on the root causes of the issues witnessed in Harris County on Election Day. That was a bill called SB 1. That was the voter integrity bill. That was the bill that allowed for random audits, and it allowed for reconciliation documents, so we'd even know that as of the November the 9th, there were 6,409 more ballots than voters. So the state obviously has recognized the issue, but more importantly, the public has. I've never been more overwhelmed with complaints to me personally. I was standing outside a barbecue joint, and I had 3 people drive up in cars and say thank you for trying to take this seriously, because they bounced off, one person bounced off many polls to finally vote. The public is enraged. They should be. This should never happen again. It shouldn't even happen at all. And how we have somebody that won't even speak to political parties or presiding judges about their problem and fix it. Because what gets measured gets fixed. If you're out of ballot paper, get more. This isn't rocket science, but it is to Clifford Tatum. And we're going to find out why. Because we've already seen, in my opinion, Class C and Class B misdemeanors broken, because that's in the code already about election supplies and not giving out those supplies or withholding them with purpose. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of legislation filed. And I suspect there's going to be election challenges. And there should be, because this can't happen again in America, Texas, or Harris County.
You know, for 2 years now, the Harris County Elections Office have blamed Republicans. They've said the Republicans are vote suppressionists. They said we're doing things that undermine people's faith in our elections. Well, guess who's to blame? It's never been us, it's been them each time. The Harris County Elections Office suppressed votes. And even worse, they've called into question the trust in our elections. And they're going to tell you that they're fixing it, or they had everything under control. And the truth is, again, they're the arsonist and the firemen. They can't be trusted. Senator Betancourt's right. We're going to have to look at legislation to fix these things. Hopefully, people will go to jail as they should. I don't have that much faith in the Harris County DA's office, but Kim Hogg, if you're listening, you've got a job to do. Some people need to go to jail.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Hi, so do you feel like the governor is asking, the Secretary of State to
It's an important distinction because the governor's press release said the Texas Rangers and the Secretary of State. I actually had a bill on that last session so that the Secretary of State could call the Rangers in. So they're bringing in law enforcement combined with the Secretary of State's office and the Forensic Audit Division to do the investigation. Andy?
Sure. I'll just give you an example. It's a criminal offense to publicly issue early voting election returns before all of the votes have been cast during early voting or on election day. That makes sense. We don't want to have sort of a free look at how the election is going before we've actually cast our ballot, because that can influence how people vote. It can cause somebody to say, well, that race is lost, I'm not even gonna vote, and they turn around and leave. So there are criminal consequences for publicly disseminating vote totals before the vote is finished. Well, guess what? On election night, while they're in front of a judge on an emergency basis asking to allow voters to vote for 1 extra hour, before that hour of voting was finished, guess what? Clifford Tatum and Harris County, they issued the election vote totals for early voting. That's illegal. That is a criminal violation. And so that is just one example of why people like the Texas Rangers are going to be conducting an investigation. And that is far different than simply the Secretary of State conducting an audit. The audit is, what does the paper show? A criminal investigation is, what did people do? And I believe that it's in the public's best interest to get to the bottom of what Clifford Tatum did.
Isn't it true that Tatum was fired in D.C. for a similar kind of complaint and brought to Harris County to deliver what he was hired to do?
That's my understanding, that Cliff Tatum had the same sort of problems in other elections, and I think it was reported in the media in other elections in other states where he was in charge of the elections. Other questions?
Yeah, for Senator Beck, we're on this first day of filing bills. You mentioned potential legislation. Anything that you've seen so far that you think specific from this election needs to be addressed at the state level with legislation?
Well, there's the bill that I had filed in the 87th legislature. I'm going from memory. I think it's 1589. That allowed the Secretary of State to be able to have Texas Ranger capability and call them into an investigation. So this would be something that the Secretary of State could do without effectively an executive order. There's going to be lots of discussions because my colleague and I had a brief discussion. How do you legislate common sense of making sure that you've got a warehouse full of ballots and you've got people screaming their heads off at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, yet you will basically go into a stall game for 4 or 5 hours and not give them their ballots? I don't know how to do that. I do know how to raise the penalties from Class C and Class B misdemeanors to Class B and A and state jail felonies if that's what it's going to take to get people's attention. But we've already got one of those bills filed today, and I expect, like last session, I'll have multiples.
So what would you like to see happen to the Harris County Elections Administrator's office?
You go ahead, take it.
How would you see that process going?
Well, first, I think we need to dig beyond Cliff Tatum. I think that there's a management team that's been in place for the last couple years. I think that that's part of our problem, and I'm a big believer in shining the light on this. I think we need to get to the bottom of it, find out why in Harris County we continue to have these problems. Why do we have machines that don't work? Why do we have polls that don't open on time? Why do we have machines that are not hooked up right, or the scanner breaks? Other counties have used the HART machines. They have the same sort of scanners. They have 2-page ballots. They don't have that problem. Why are we not maintaining our equipment? I think the problem is pervasive. I think it is systemic. I think it's not just a case of, oh, well, this election administrator messed up, so we're going to get rid of he or she, and the same problems continue to happen. It's every election. Look at the problems that have occurred. The primary, May 7th, May 24th, remember May 24th? They decided they were gonna go out and pick up the ballots. Well, then we ask our judges, because the way the law is, the presiding judge is responsible to deliver the ballots to central count. They can appoint their alternate judge or an election clerk. Well, the county, not keeping with the spirit of the law, but technically what they did is they sent out county employees who would show up and they would have that judge swear them in as a clerk. Now, is that really the spirit of what the law is trying to accomplish? It wants to preserve the integrity of your ballot. It wants to make sure that there's a chain of custody every step of the way. So we've got to shine the light on this once and for all. And as I was saying in the spring, I am thrilled that the Secretary of State, the Attorney General's office, that the governor believes that this is serious enough, that we need to do the right thing so that we can make sure that people know when you go to vote, you're going to be able to walk into a poll at 7 a.m. You're going to be able to go and check in and go to what they call a duo, the voting machine, record your vote and scan it in, and know that it's going to safely, securely get to central count, and it'll be counted. This hurts all of us. This is not a partisan issue. It hurts all of us. You know, we mentioned the Republican polls. Well, we have countywide voting. That means that those Republican polls where we were running out of paper, I am sure that there were independents and Democrats that were trying to vote there too that didn't get to vote. We have complaints after complaint. Our phones have been flooded. I know our local elected officials, their phones have been flooded. You know, people are complaining. We're sending them to the Secretary of State. But this is so important to our democracy to know that the elections are going to work. And Mr. Tatum, I think he was on the front page of the Chronicle yesterday saying that these elections, they ran fine. What is he trying to do now? He's calling all of our judges and trying to get them to admit that they had enough paper or that they called the wrong number. And I think that's called CYA.
Let me add something
Yeah.
real fast. To that last question, the bill has been refiled this session already about 40 minutes ago. It's called Senate Bill 2020, and that's the bill that allows embedded Texas Rangers to be part of a Secretary of State investigation. Thank you. Go ahead.
With the, the errors that took place, will that, one, affect how this election came out? And can that absolutely, can they forensically go back and match those ballots and find out what was what?
I'm gonna let you.
What
I'm
should
gonna
have
let
been
the
done,
lawyer.
what shouldn't have been done, and have record of every single person that cast a vote Tuesday night, last week?
There are folks in the public who think that the Harris County Republican Party can file a lawsuit and require a new election. That is not correct. The Texas Election Code does not give a political party that power. The only individuals who can seek a new election are those that were candidates on the ballot. And the candidates that would likely file an election contest are the ones who just came up short by a few votes. I've been handling election contests for 35 years. I was President Bush's lawyer in the Florida recount. I can tell you in my entire career, I've never seen a case where an election contest is more viable than this election right here in Harris County, I'm sad to say. We have tens of thousands of votes that you can't actually know who they voted for because they were turned away, or there's a double count or some other irregularity. And so what happens is a purportedly defeated candidate will file an election challenge. That's not heard by a Harris County judge. By law, it's going to be heard by a judge outside of Harris County, so that that judge is not under any political pressure from the local folks. And that judge will call balls and strikes on whether or not ballots that were cast should have been counted and whether ballots that were not counted should have been counted. So you actually will change and subtract and add to the election counts. And at the end of the day, you either will know with certainty that the purported defeated candidate actually won, and so they'll flip the result and seat that person, or you cannot tell, which is my prediction. I believe that based on the evidence in this case, you cannot tell the true outcome of this race. You just can't ascertain it because there's so many mistakes. And so what the law says in that regard, new election. So any candidate who files and is able to show their burden of proof that you can't trust the outcome, they get a new election. It doesn't go up, doesn't go down the ballot. It's candidate by candidate.
Do you know if any of your Republican candidates will file for that?
I don't know at this point. I would just say this, if I were purportedly a defeated candidate and my margin of defeat is a few thousand votes, boy, I'd file, because this is low-hanging fruit, the way Cliff Tatum ran this thing.
Only if you will be decided,
I'm sorry?
only if you will be decided, not if you will be defeated.
You have to be defeated based on the poll numbers at the end to be entitled to file this. Obviously, if you've won, you're not going to challenge the election. You're happy. So it's only somebody who has less votes than the other side that is statutorily allowed. This is something the legislature created. It's a very narrow thing. Not anybody can do this, only defeated candidates.
So we have countywide voting here in Harris County, so that means that, you don't have to go vote at your exact polling location, your precinct, you can go somewhere else. And we have so many polling locations here, like some are within walking distance of each other. Do you have proof that there were a large number of people who went to vote, there was no paper, and they just didn't vote at all? And then are there enough of those people that you found that would actually change the outcomes of any elections?
Our investigation thus far has uncovered not hundreds, but thousands of registered voters who intended to vote on election day and were turned away. They were turned away so late in the game there wasn't enough time to go vote somewhere else. I also want to tell you something. Remember that emergency hearing I mentioned earlier where I sort of as an interloper just invited myself to participate? During that hearing, the other side, the plaintiffs who filed the case, and the county agreed with the judge that the argument that you could go somewhere else to vote was not a legal argument that was valid. They said we already are putting enough pressure on common, ordinary citizens to vote. We're not going to create literally a modern day poll tax and make somebody not be able to vote and then have to go somewhere else. They chastised that argument. It'll be very interesting to see in the case we just filed whether they're going to flip-flop or if they're going to stick to what they said. But we have a transcript of what they said, and we're going to hold them to their words.
This lawsuit that you just filed, what is your ideal outcome?
What we would like to do is get a legal finding that Harris County and its elections administrator, Tatum, violated the election code in multiple ways. That's goal number one. You violated the law. Goal number two is to protect the future of Harris County elections. We are asking in this lawsuit, order that this never happen again. So we want to restore trust in the voters of Harris County in the outcomes that get reported. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. This is an American and a Texan issue. We all should be unanimously in favor of trusting the outcome of an election.
So secondarily, could this nullify this whole election?
The defeated candidates, one by one, up the ballot, down the ballot, can make that pitch in a courtroom, but not us. We would if we could, but we're not allowed to under the laws that exist.
Are you able to provide any of the names? I know you said that there were thousands of people who bounced around to different polls. Are you able to provide any names?
Well, we are continually taking that data and that information. We actually have had some of our presiding judges, I think, that have talked to the press on those situations, where they actually ran out of paper. The question was I'll tell you what I want. I want to know, and I think the only way we're going to get there is to have either the Secretary of State, some independent, or the court outside of Harris County that will provide oversight and ensure that we put the proper controls, the proper procedures. We have people that we can rely upon who are running the elections, that they'll run it fairly, securely, and by the law. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.